I miss the old Sony. And if you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, odds are you love 3D platformers, and the PlayStation consoles from the PlayStation 1, 2 and 3 catered to these tastes perfectly. Not only did they have high quality platformers, they also had an absolutely insane amount of them. There was Crash, Spyro, Ape Escape, Sly, Ratchet, LittleBigPlanet, Medieval, even later games like Tearaway. The list goes on. And I missed these times when Sony would release games like this. Now don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the Spider-Man series and I love Uncharted, God of War and The Last of Us. But I crave something a bit more unique, a bit more creative, and finally Sony are giving us that with Astrobot, which is releasing in a couple of days. But this video is all about the old days of PlayStation platforms and what they mean to me and what I assume they mean to everybody watching this, because they really are special games. Late 90s and early 2000s Sony was an extremely creative company, and all of these amazing games oozed so much charm. They are so memorable. Each one has its unique quirks, like how Ape Escape introduced the dual shock to everybody, how Crash Bandicoot leaned into its difficulty, how Spyro leaned into the sort of mystical adventure and made an easier platformer, how Sly leaned into stealth platforming and then almost became an immersive sim, and then of course LittleBigPlanet, which is just on a complete other level of creativity than all of these other games. Not only are these amazing games in their own right, they also created so many core memories for me of playing Crash 3 before school with my brother, or forcing my sister to play Ratchet and Clank 3's multiplayer, or one of my favourites is sitting down with my sister, my cousin, and we would browse through the almost infinite amount of LittleBigPlanet levels, playing anything we could get our hands on. And it was very sad when I went to play some LittleBigPlanet to capture some footage, and I was greeted with this screen when I first loaded it up. And while it's sad to see the LittleBigPlanet servers going down, I have to admit, over the past couple of days where I was playing through a couple of these games, capturing footage, just testing them out for a couple of hours, I don't think I've had so much fun in a long time. Every single time I started up one of these games, I was just filled with this nostalgia, like sometimes gave me goosebumps. Spyro 2, particularly. The music in LittleBigPlanet 1 is just absolutely fantastic, and the narration just brings me back to when I first played LittleBigPlanet all them years ago. And even later games that I want to give a shout out to later on in the video, like Tearaway and Concrete Genie. I know Concrete Genie isn't really a platformer, but I think it perfectly captured that early to mid 2000s Sony magic and gave it to a modern audience, and unfortunately they just don't really make games like this anymore.
You want me to do that? To paint this whole town back to life.
Now my love for these Sony 3D platformers started with two of my favourite games of all time, and they are Crash 3 Warped and Spyro Gateway to Glimmer, which I much prefer the name Gateway to Glimmer because I think it really hits home on that mystical, magical feeling that Spyro just evokes in me. And even going back to it now, going into the levels, how inventive they are, the sort of airy, fairy music that just fills up every single level. There's just something so magical about this game. And my first memory of playing Spyro 2 was going to my friend's house after school, and his uncle had a PS1 and he had a demo disc that had Spyro 2 on it. And if I remember correctly, the only level on the disc was the lava level. I don't remember the name, but the one with the sort of prehistoric dinosaur bones and the sort of cavemen running around. And to this day, that is one of my favourite levels in any game ever created. And I think it's realistically because of that nostalgia. Out of all the levels in Spyro 2 that I can remember, I just loved all of them because every single one of them was completely unique. You just had some random stories of these islanders that waked up a lot of tiki heads and now they're trying to kill them all. I just love how it's so inventive with the tiki enemies having like marshmallows on a stick, or they have like a skewer with a shield. And later on there are so many memorable levels, like the one where you have to lead the turtle babies back to their mom and all this stuff. Even having not really played this game in a long time, like I dabbled in it to capture some footage there on my PS3 through the PS1 classics. I played the Reignited trilogy, which I absolutely adore, and I platinumed it back then. I just absolutely love this game, and I think it's particularly because I prefer the sort of collectathon style of 3D platformers. I don't really care for too much difficulty in my platformers, specifically the 3D ones. I'd much rather sort of have an adventure that is fun. It's fun to control the character, to explore the levels. And I think stuff like Spyro, Mario 64, Sunshine is quite difficult, but Mario Odyssey, again, that's another one that sort of just gives you open levels to run around and explore. It's not overly difficult. And I like how back in the day on the PlayStation 1, I had a lot of choice for these platformers. Like I had Croc, I had Ape Escape, I had Crash, and they all gave you something different. Where Ape Escape gave you this just overwhelming personality of these random monkeys running around. You can zoom in on the monkeys and it tells you their backstory, and they all have different things that they do. One flies into a spaceship, one has a gun, one just like runs away and throws bananas at you, and there's just so much charm and personality. And now I didn't really get into the Ape Escape series until I played it on the PSP. So back then I wasn't really blown away of like, oh, this is the DualShock, because by the time I realistically started to remember games, the DualShock was already a thing. That's the only real controller I ever really remember using on the PS1. So that sort of like tech gimmick wasn't exactly super, relevant to me back then. But nowadays you can almost see the translation of what Ape Escape was and how they brought that forward into what Astrobot will be, how they implemented the DualSense, how they implemented PSVR 1. It's sort of like Astrobot is the tech demo to the PlayStation 4 and 5 the way Ape Escape was to the PS1, and I just love that you can see that lineage growing as you go along. And then with the rest of the PS1 platformers, I like that, yes, I had those easy sort of collectathon, just switch your brain off, enjoy these wonderful worlds. And then when I wanted something a bit more challenging, even though I was a kid, and I did beat it back then, but it was very difficult, Crash 3 gave me, I believe, the perfect balance of what difficulty can be in a 3D platformer. Because I think Crash 2 is roughly there. I just prefer Crash 3 because it's the one I have more nostalgia for. Crash 1 I personally don't like. I think that game is just extremely unbalanced and not really fun to play. Whereas Crash 3 gives you all of these super inventive levels. You're going to completely different areas and different time zones. I think the only real sort of critique I would give of Crash 3 is that there are a fair few sort of gimmicky levels, and specifically the underwater ones aren't very good. And Ratchet Cortex gives you way too much when you play that, and I will do a video on that later. But Crash 3, I just absolutely love it. The title screen is one of the best title screens ever in a game.
Sony Computer Entertainment Europe presents a Universal Interactive Studios production. A game created and developed by Naughty Dog. Crash Bandicoot 4.
And that perfectly leads me onto the PS2, where if we're talking about title screens and you watched the last video, I love the Ratchet series. The Ratchet series is arguably my favorite series of all time. It's either that or Zelda. I love almost every single entry in the series, bar size matters. But this series holds a massive place in my heart, probably the biggest place, just right beside Zelda. I don't really have that much room left in my heart for some of these games, but when I think of Ratchet, I think of the PS2, I think of these fantastic whimsical characters, the commentary on different kind of things, like how Ratchet 1 is all about evil corporations, Ratchet 2 is too. Ratchet 3 is this sort of like weird, almost, uprising of a downtrodden people in the robots coming back, and Dr. Nefarious trying to take over the world, and they try to do it through propaganda, through Britney Gears. And Gladiator, or Deadlock if you're in the States, is this weird sort of parody of game shows and how crazy they get. And this series just has so much personality. The characters are extremely expressive. The bosses and the main villains are so memorable. Drek and Nefarious. Obviously, Nefarious is one of the best platforming villains ever created. And then you have the side characters like Quark that just flesh out this sort of roster of characters into making this just a brilliant series. And that's not even talking about the guns, where you have these insane guns. You have the Agents of Doom, which I just love how cute they are. They're so cool. They're so menacing. They just run around. They just bite people. They're just fantastic. And even though these are in the later games, you have stuff like the Groovatron that are just iconic. And then we have the Jak and Daxter series, which I believe Jak and Daxter is one of the best 3D platformers ever made. I could certainly listen to an argument that Jak and Daxter is the best 3D platformer ever made. It's a technical masterpiece, as Naughty Dog have done previously with Crash. They then did it with Jak and Daxter with no load screens, and then they moved on to making Uncharted and The Last of Us, turning this platforming studio into one of the powerhouses. And realistically, it's like Naughty Dog and Rockstar are like right up the top of the sort of bar of quality that games can give you. And I think if we're talking about fantastic opening levels, Jak and Daxter does it better than almost every single game out there. It's this seaside town, you have the beach, you have the rocks you can climb, you have the little village you can explore, you have all these sort of little side objectives like rounding up the cows to bring them back to the farmer. And I think what this game does so good is that it gives you that sense of adventure that Spyro gave you. But with Spyro, you went into level gates and you had loading screens and things weren't connected. But here, they just give you this open world to explore that was something I'd never really seen in a game. So back then, it was so special. Because when it comes to stuff like, say, Mario 64, obviously I understand the importance of that. What if you went from 2D to 3D, how just mind-blowing that was. But since I was born in 1998, I knew 3D games when I was born. They were all I ever knew. So the sort of leap from 2D to 3D didn't make much sense to me. But I think even back then I understood with this translation of this kind of, you know, Spyro-ish open level design into an open world where you don't have any load screens, and how that just makes it feel more adventurous than any other game that ever came out. Now, in saying that, when it came to the rest of the Jak series, I've never played Jak 2, and Jak 3 was a game that my mom went away and she came home on my birthday and she brought me back Jak 3. And she brought me back this little weird Neopets thing, this like little Tamagotchi kind of thing, and I remember it. But Jak 3 was a game that I played, I beat, I enjoyed, but it hasn't stuck me the same way Jak and Daxter did. Nowhere even close. And I personally just don't like the direction that the series went in. I've covered Daxter on this channel. I don't really like Daxter now. Back then I liked it, but I don't think it really held up very well. And I think a lot of it is to do with the tone that Jak and Daxter took going forward after Jak 1. And I know what you're thinking, you know, it's just a 26-year-old man talking about the games that he loved when he was a kid. And of course he's going to love them because, you know, he played them, he's filled with nostalgia, he watches them through his rose-tinted glasses. But Sly Cooper was a series I only ever experienced through, I believe, a Sly 2 demo on the Ratchet and Clank 3 disc. And it's sort of the opening part of the Paris level. And it was the only time I ever played Sly. Until about 2017, I think I had bought the Sly trilogy on PS3, but I played like an hour of Sly 1, didn't get into it. And then a couple of years later, I went back to it on the Vita, and I fell in love with these games. Sly 1, back then, when I first played it, I was like, oh, this game isn't very good. But I recently went back and played it since it came onto the PS2, and there's something special about that game. It's completely different to all the other games. You can see it's kind of Crash-like, but it was leaning into the more stealth and, you know, sort of on-rails platforming kind of thing, which then evolved into the stealth, immersive sim gameplay of Sly 2, 3, and 4. And what they did with Sly 2 is unbelievable. I cannot believe I missed out on that game back in the day because I would have absolutely adored it. Again, there's just charm. All the characters are so unique and memorable. Every single boss has their own backstory. They've, you know, a cool accent, cool voice acting, or they just look cool. So you just remember every single one of them. And then they do something that I believe only really Ratchet did, where they really built the relationship of the main characters up. So Sly, Bentley, and Murray actually have a real story, and, you know, I won't spoil what happens to Bentley, but, you know, it's very tragic. But it's just great that they sort of had the balls to be able to almost give this a bit of a narrative and a continuous narrative similar to what Ratchet did, and, you know, kind of retcon the Tools of Destruction and then remade. But I appreciate them trying it at the very least. And now there's one PS3 series that I have to talk about, and again, there are parallels to draw from LittleBigPlanet to Astrobot. Sackboy was the blank canvas of what Sony could do. Eventually they had different costumes. You could dress up as Sir Daniel Fortescue, you could dress up as Ratchet and Clank, you could dress up as Solid Snake, and they had different level packs. And Sackboy was like the blank slate to project all these Sony licenses onto. And obviously Astrobot is the same because the levels are based around different Sony IP, and you can find all like the Hunter Bot and the Ratchet Bot and all that. And just like how you could see the lineage drawn from Ape Escape all the way up to Astrobot, I think you can do the same with LittleBigPlanet all the way up to Astrobot. And I love that because Sackboy is a fantastic character. I loved Sackboy so much that I went out and I bought a mechanical pencil so that I could draw myself, and I really wish I still had the picture. The drawing, it was pretty decent. You know, I'm okay at drawing. I'm not overly amazing, but I'm decent. And even for my age, it looked really good because I used to watch tutorials on how to draw with the mechanical pencil, because you needed the really thin tip of the pencil to do all the fine little stitches and all that. And he's just so cute. Turned on LittleBigPlanet 1 there 2 days ago to play it. And oh my god, the nostalgia I was filled up with because of everything. Sackboy is extremely cute. Not only is he extremely cute, he's very expressive. Because you can wave your arms around, you can change your facial expressions, you can move his hips, you can move his head, you can do anything you want with him. And I love how I can see that Media Molecule went with a mantra of, we want you to be able to express yourself through Sackboy, whether you want to be, I don't know, some medieval guy with a monocle or a mustache, or you wanted to play as your favorite character, like some of the Dark Souls characters, or Ratchet, or Sly, or, you know, insert whatever character you want to play as, but also down to the little details where you can move them the way you want. And I used to love being in lobbies with people and you can punch them and knock them over. And they're just the memories I have with this game. The platforming itself is obviously quite floaty, and it's more physics based, so it's kind of not really precise. It's not super precise, but it made for some really fun gameplay moments, especially in the user-created levels, because it's so funny how things evolved. I remember the early days of LittleBigPlanet 1 levels where it would be like Mario 1-1 in LittleBigPlanet, or the one me and my brother built together was like just a skateboard going down a hill. We thought it was the best thing ever. And you get all those very primitive levels. And then as LittleBigPlanet 1 progressed and people got better with the tools, and then LittleBigPlanet 2 and later 3 came out, people just went crazy with it. You are playing nearly full-fledged RPGs in it. My friend, and I'd say a lot of you might have actually played this level because it was extremely popular. My friend built a fully working Minecraft level that had a working title screen that you could open up the options with a mouse cursor. You could press single player, you could press multiplayer. It was an absolute feat. I can't believe he did it, and unfortunately I think the servers are completely down now, so you can't see it. But if you have played that level, let me know, because what he did with that level is absolutely mind-blowing. And later on we built like a COD Zombies level where I made the actual level. He did all the logic behind it. He built a cutscene in it. I'm like, oh my god, the stuff people could do with that game was insane. And I just love the memories of sitting down with my sister or my cousin or something, and we just comb through whatever we wanted. We'd do Disney rides where you'd go on Pirates of the Caribbean, or It's a Small World, or you do some like weird twin stick shooter. There was just so much you could do. And one thing that I love about this, and one thing that I lament about Dreams, is that even though LittleBigPlanet was built as a tool for people to be able to make levels, Media Molecule still made their own levels, and a lot of them were actually quite fun. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, the later levels kind of get frustrating because the platforming isn't amazing, but I just remember it being really inventive. You were in almost like a sort of South American themed level. You were in a savannah, you were in a spooky castle, you were, you know, going to all these different places. And that's one thing about Dreams that I kind of disappointed about, because that art stream in Dreams was fun and I did enjoy it, but it was very short, and then after that you were just relying on other people. And that's the sad thing if the servers of Dreams do go down, which inevitably they will because that game is not doing very good, is that Dreams won't be a package that I could go back and play. Like, I could go back and play LittleBigPlanet 1, 2 and 3. I know 3 wasn't made by Media Molecule, but I could go back and play all 3 of them games and still have a great time because the platforming and the levels they designed are still really fun. Whereas with Dreams, you know, once the servers go down, that's it. I won't want to play art streams. And also, Media Molecule are kind of wasted making that sort of stuff. I would love to see what they do with their own game, because Tearaway is, even though it's not retro, I'm putting it on the channel, Tearaway is fucking fantastic. Even the PS4 version where they had to like rejig things, where you have to use the DualShock 4 in sort of creative ways, to use motion controls for light and stuff like that and draw with the touchpad. But on the Vita, where you could pop your fingers through the screen, where you could guide things with the gyro, you could aim stuff, you could use the camera. There's just so much creativity in that. That's realistically what I'm wanting from Astrobot going forward. Because one thing I want to touch on, Astrobot on PSVR 1 is one of my favorite 3D platformers of all time. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but it genuinely is. And it's for this reason. I said earlier that sort of the move from 2D to 3D wasn't, you know, big for me because I started and I was already playing 3D games, so, you know, it wasn't very impressive. So I was kind of missing out on that. I still enjoyed all these 3D platforms, as you can see, but I didn't get that, like, wow moment. And then, one Christmas, I got PSVR 1, I got Firewall 0 Hour, and I got Astrobot Rescue Mission. And I sat down on Christmas morning, like a kid. I was 18, 19 at the time. Put the headset on, and when I played the first couple of levels of Astrobot, I was just absolutely blown away by everything. So, Christmas morning, I wanted to get my motion sickness legs ready, and I heard that ginger gum, ginger tea, if you want to just chew raw ginger, whatever you want to do, was really good for motion sickness. So I bought ginger gum. So on Christmas morning, I had the complete experience of senses. The smells of your house at Christmas, the sort of excitement of a new console at Christmas, tasting a new flavor like ginger gum, and then experiencing a 3D platformer in a different way. And nothing has touched it since as an experience, and I don't think anything will for a long time. Because when I finished my first PlayStation, I thought to myself, this is what people must have experienced going from 2D to 3D, playing, say, Super Mario World, and then going to play Mario 64. And that's why I love Astrobot so much. I love all of these franchises. I would love to know what all your favorite memories are with these fantastic games. And also, what is your favorite? I know there's a massive list. Loads I didn't even mention. Croc, Medieval. There's, you know, a handful of Puppeteer. There's loads of other games I didn't play. So let me know what one is your favorite, and let me know how excited you are for Astrobot, because I can't wait. And I will be covering it on this channel, even though it's not a retro game, but it makes sense because it's a platformer, and obviously it's a throwback to Sony games. So thank you for watching. My last video was on Ratchet and Clank 1, so enjoy that. This way. Goodbye.